our Black Box Letter. Actually, this we'd be remiss if we didn't have an opportunity to talk about the passing of Michael K. Williams. So recently, with the passing of Michael K. Williams, um, earlier this week, his nephew, no one had heard from him, and his nephew went to go see what was going on with him and found him unresponsive and cold in his Brooklyn apartment. Police investigators came on site and said, based on the evidence that they have at that point, it seems as though the death was drug related, more specifically heroin related. Michael K. Williams has always been very, very vocal about his battle with drug abuse and what it has meant to him and to his life, and how he's always been on the precipice of falling off the cart, so to speak. This kind of hit home for me. And I mean, maybe it's just because I'm getting older, and when you see some of these people that are within spitting distance of your age, it hits a little bit different. But finding this news out really kind of got to me. I mean, first introduced to him as Omar from The Wire. Of course, you see him as Chalky White in Boardwalk Empire, and most recently, what was he? Montrose Freeman in Lovecraft Country. All incredible performances. I wanted to take this opportunity not only just to talk about him, but also just to talk about, and I think we've had this conversation, but I think it bears some repeating, the effect that addiction has on us as Black men and in the Black community. So what were your thoughts, or what were your emotions when you first found out that he passed?
I'll go first. I was definitely very surprised. A part of me was really surprised, because it seemed like he was definitely on a run, and he seemed like he was like taking on projects as bold and as daring as ever, and I could not wait for his next move. We lost another giant. Unfortunately, allegedly, the circumstances that we are familiar with Mr. Williams, and I remember the stories, and I got a lot of stories from him, coincidentally, through music, and his love for music has always been there. Especially when he was hanging out in Baltimore. When he lived in Baltimore, it was very apparent, and his presence in underground hip hop was crazy. For like, I wouldn't know why friends of mine would run into him at different shows and stuff. He was definitely a man of the people, and he was a committed thespian of a completely different. I mean, he was definitely part of a certain class of black actors that came up. I mean, because I'm seeing, the response from a certain group of actors and actresses. Mm-hmm. I realized, wait a minute, all you guys were running with him, all you guys. And so I'm like, damn. I know how it felt when my brother Black Mav, passed in our community here, and for that community, it must be that loss must be so tremendous. And I mean, just in general, from one brother to another, and who was committed to the arts and committed to also being honest about the struggles he's had with himself and the struggles he's had as a black man. He's been very frank about that as well. That's a voice that will be sorely missed. Especially as we go into this future. I was really I heard about some wild projects that he was about to kick off that would have been legendary. He was a bold artist. He had no fear, no fear, and I'm hurt. I heard so much this year, but this is just more hurt. Just a reminder to stay close to your loved ones and give your flowers to your great artists while they're here. To your great men, to the great men that give them their flowers now.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh man, this is one of those signature celebrity deaths for me that really had me take inventory of not only my life, but uh, what my life is producing.
Hmm.
Uh, and I mean that from the standpoint is if you listen to this show, you've heard me speak about uh, my family's own battles with addiction. I've been incredibly open and transparent about those things. And the beautiful thing about Michael K. Williams, outside of being a lover of all things black, outside of being an incredibly gifted artist, not even just an actor, because I think actor diminishes his other talents and gifts. He was an artist, but he was one of the most transparent and open artists about their battles that I've ever seen. And I know we talk about his roles, in Lovecraft and The Wire and Boardwalk Empire, but for me, he did a little watch docu series on Vice a couple years ago,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah.
And for me, that was when I fell in love with him as a black man, as an artist. Because as he's having conversations with different people and different struggles, he always was able to connect with them
Yeah.
based off of his own personal struggles. He never shied away from that. And I think that is one of the things that is part of the beauty of people understanding their flaws and their weaknesses, right? Like a lot of us know our flaws internally, but most of us don't want to acknowledge and embrace and celebrate our
Externalize it, right?
flaws, our weaknesses. Like, you know, we just don't do it. And particularly as black men, for a variety of reasons, we don't do it. But he was one of those. His death hit me harder. And not to, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way. His death hit me harder than Chadwick Boseman's death, because I could connect with Michael K. Williams as a hood dude, as someone who battled addiction, who had roles in series and movies that I can identify with and were everyday people to me. Oh, listen, Omar from The Wire was an everyday dude that I can tell you 4 or 5 different Omars that I know from various parts of the city. I can connect with him in that level, and just the way that he genuinely loved black folk. I mean, he loves black people. He was never too highfalutin and too, so in love with his celebrity that it kept him. I mean, I listen, it shook me.
I think it's interesting because in 2017, the New York Times did a profile exhibit for him, and he really talked about his life. He bared it all out, and his life story is fascinating. He talked about how he got his iconic scar on his face. He's like on the eve before his 25th birthday, excuse me, that he went to a club or something like that, came outside of the club, saw one of his homeboys getting jumped and tried to step in, and somebody pulled out a razor blade and got him. Boom. Slashed him from his face down to his, and got him in the neck too. And that it cut through his jugular, and that he literally almost died on the street. He said the very next day his mom came to see him in the hospital and told him, "You're not even going to make it to see 30 years old." And she took out a second life insurance policy on him. And he said, "I believed her. I didn't think I was ever going to make it to see 30 years old," because he had been battling drug addiction since he was like 18, 17 years old, and that he became a petty criminal to try and keep up with that drug addiction. You know what I'm saying? And how it essentially built a monster for him. He said the only thing that was getting thick was his rap sheet. He wasn't even making money off it because he wasn't even being a good hustle man. But it also shows you how you fall into things, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to necessarily say how the universe works, but it's just so sometimes I am in awe of how things fall into place. He was an exceptional dancer. People knew him because he was an exceptional dancer, right? And somehow, some way, he found himself on a set for a music video, and P. Diddy saw him and was like, "You shouldn't be dancing. You have a look to be an actor. You should be an actor." And that's how he started getting into different acting gigs. And he auditioned for The Wire, which is one of his first roles. And a dude, so I forget what the gentleman's name is. He used to be a writer for the Baltimore Sun how many years ago. The guy that's the mind behind The Wire said he saw his face off Jump Street. Was like, yeah, that's
Price, I believe, right?
I believe so. I forget the guy's name.
Yeah. Hell of a writer too, Price, by the way. Side note.
He was in a Janet Jackson video.
You said what?
I think he was in a Janet Jackson.
Janet Jackson did. Madonna also.
He was, yeah. And that's how we got his start. That's how we got his start. I think one of the other things that we would be remiss not to talk about is, even in the midst of a pandemic, that people are still going through high drug addiction through the year of 2020.
It's even higher.
So some of the provisional data, and this is just a rundown. So some of the provisional data from the CDC shows that there were 90,237 drug overdose deaths in the 12 months ending in September of 2020. A leading indicator that implies a substantial increase from 2019's total of 70,630. When final figures to the most recent CDC figures, this is what they've said. They said all of them have been, for all of 2020, 70% of the drug overdose deaths are opioid related, according to the most recent figures from the CDC. This is according to the Washington Post and the CDC.
When you think opioids, bro, remember opioids. You think
we know what time it is, but that's also part of the interesting
illegal
part,
and prescribed.
Right? But that's part of the interesting part about it, right? Because before the pandemic, we were led to believe now that drug abuse is actually, or drug usage is actually, a medical thing. It's no longer an issue about evil people, bad people using drugs, because that's the way the message was portrayed to us as we were growing up. Were you talking about weed? Were you talking about the crack, the war on drugs that started because of the crack epidemic? All of those things. Now, because of white people, we now have this notion that it's a serious problem, a medical problem that needs to be addressed. And then, for whatever reason, in the midst of this pandemic, we've forgotten all about it.
And it's fascinating too.
Over 90,000. That's almost 100,000.
Yeah, I mean, there was an opioid epidemic building for a couple of years now.
Of course.
Sure,
you know, this was the crescendo of that shit.
Now, remember how many times we've had a conversation about critical race theory on this show. We've had a number of conversations, and I bring up the point specifically because the father of critical race theory, Derek Bell, had this thing called interest convergence. Interest convergence essentially is things for Black people begin to change when it influences or affects white people.
White people, yeah.
So, and we see this, and the opioid crisis is a prime ass example, because remember, within the Black community, opioid addiction has been a problem for us since Vietnam.
Yep.
Okay, since Vietnam, it's been a problem, and it didn't become a problem that other folks began to pour money and research and resources in until Tommy, Karen, and Little Sue start ODing on the couch.
Yep. True. Yep.
When it comes to addiction, we have a tremendous amount of work to do in the grace category and in the knowledge category.
I'll give you that. And I think we've had that conversation briefly on the show. I will be one to say that as much as I'm trying to show grace, I have people in my family that have suffered from addiction, and it's hard for me to come to grips with it, to wholeheartedly see it as not an issue of choice. The logical part of me says, I know that this is part of their makeup now, like the makeup of their cell structure at some point, right? Becomes so used to, so addicted
changes.
To chemical, that it brings them to these brinks. And then you you reminisce about some of the things that have happened in your life, or you see certain actions from these people, and you're like you can't come to grips with it. And I think and I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I do think that it's very interesting that there are so many people that are not even willing to have that conversation. I remember, to take it back a few episodes back, we had conversations about these injection sites that they have in Europe and that are popping up on the West Coast. And I can't tell you the number of older Black people that messaged me after that episode and told me, nope. I think that's the most ridiculous thing that we could do. We need to stop that. I don't want to.
Helping them. Yep.
And so I'm going to ask you this, and we can close it out after that. What do you think we can do to break down that barricade that stops us from being able to have those genuine, honest, and productive conversations to make this, to help, I won't say to get rid of it, but to help this ease? You know what I mean?
I think we just need to continue to have the conversations, right? We just really need to not allow taboo, difficult subjects to prevent us from having the conversations. Because far too often, one of the reasons why we don't have the conversations is we're concerned about the blowback from the conversation. We're concerned about being outcast. We're concerned about being ostracized. We're concerned about all these legitimate things. But I think those things, even in legitimacy, should not keep us from having these much needed conversations.